The year was 1947. The British Empire, once so vast that the sun was said to never set upon it, was about to lose its brightest jewel. But India's freedom did not come easily. It was not a single event nor a simple act of rebellion. It was a century-long storm of struggle, blood, diplomacy, and courage that changed the course of world history forever. This is the story of how India, the most prized colony of the British Empire, won its freedom. When the British first arrived in India in the early 1600s, they came as traders, humble merchants of the East India Company, but behind those trade ships lay a hunger for power. India, with its spices, silks, and gold, was one of the richest lands on earth. By using cunning alliances, manipulation, and force, the British slowly transformed from guests to rulers. The turning point came in 1757 at the Battle of Plassey. A single victory by Robert Clive against the Nawab of Bengal and his French allies opened the gates for nearly 2 centuries of British dominance. They ruled through strategy and divide, playing Indian princes and kingdoms against one another, exploiting their rivalries and slowly binding the subcontinent under one imperial chain. But ruling India wasn't just about territory. It was about control of its people, its resources, and even its identity. The British drained India's wealth, imposed taxes on farmers, and dismantled local industries. The same nation that once exported fine textiles and jewels now became a land of poverty and famine. Yet, under the surface, resentment began to grow. In 1857, that resentment erupted into fire. It started with a rumor that new rifle cartridges used by Indian soldiers were greased with cow and pig fat, offending both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. But that spark ignited an inferno, the Great Rebellion, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny. For over a year, Indian soldiers and civilians fought back against their British overlords in one of the bloodiest uprisings of the 19th century. Though the rebellion was crushed, it changed everything. The East India Company was dissolved, and India came directly under the rule of the British Crown. Queen Victoria became the Empress of India. The British tightened their grip, but the idea of independence had been born. In the decades that followed, new forces began to rise. Educated Indians, exposed to Western ideals of liberty and equality, began to question British rule. By the late 19th century, the Indian National Congress was formed, a political body that would one day become the voice of an entire nation. But at first, they were cautious. They sought reforms, not revolution. They believed that perhaps the British could be persuaded to rule justly. They were wrong. The Partition of Bengal in 1905, done deliberately to divide Hindus and Muslims, exposed the empire's true intent: divide and rule. Protests erupted. The Swadeshi movement began, urging Indians to boycott British goods and revive local industries. The cry of Van Mataram echoed through the streets. Then came World War I. Over 1 million Indian soldiers fought for Britain, believing their loyalty might earn them freedom. But when the war ended, the British response was betrayal. Instead of liberty came oppression. In 1919, in the city of Amritsar, thousands of unarmed Indians gathered peacefully in Jallianwala Bagh to protest. Without warning, British General Dr. ordered his troops to open fire. Hundreds were killed. The walls of the gardens soaked in blood. The massacre sent shockwaves across India and across the world. It was then that India's freedom struggle took a new turn, led by a man who would become its moral compass, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Gandhi's arrival changed everything. He preached not with swords or rifles, but with truth and non-violence, satyagraha. His belief was revolutionary, that no empire, however mighty, could rule over a people who refused to cooperate. He urged Indians to spin their own cloth, to reject British goods, to march peacefully for justice. The world watched as this frail man, dressed in simple white khadi, brought the world's largest empire to its knees without firing a bullet. One of the defining moments came in 1930, the Salt March. Gandhi and his followers walked 240 miles to the Arabian Sea to make salt from seawater, defying British law. It was a simple act, but it symbolized defiance, unity, and courage. Across India, millions followed. The British arrested thousands, but the tide of rebellion could no longer be stopped. Meanwhile, leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhas Chandra Bose, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and countless others carried the struggle forward. Some, like Bose, chose the path of armed resistance, forming the Indian National Army to fight the British from abroad. Others, like Nehru and Patel, kept the political flame alive at home. Then came World War II, and history's great twist. Britain, once invincible, was weakened. Its cities were bombed, its economy broken. Yet even then, it demanded India's help once again. Indian leaders said no. "Quit India," they declared in 1942. The British responded with mass arrests, but this time, their hold was slipping. After the war ended, Britain faced a new reality. It could no longer sustain an empire. The global tide had turned. Anti-colonial movements were rising across the world. The British public, exhausted from war, began to question why their government still clung to India. In 1947, after decades of resistance, rebellion, and sacrifice, the moment finally came. Britain announced it would leave India. But independence came at a price: partition. The subcontinent was divided into India and Pakistan. As the British flag was lowered and the Indian tricolor rose in its place, millions cheered and millions wept. The joy of freedom was stained with the pain of division. More than 1 million people died in the violence that followed. Yet, amid the chaos, one truth shone bright: India was free. As the clock struck midnight on August 15, 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru addressed the nation. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. The world watched as the empire that had once ruled a quarter of humanity lost its crown jewel. But in truth, it was not lost, it was reclaimed. Reclaimed by farmers and poets, by rebels and dreamers, by men and women who believed in something greater than fear. India's independence was not granted, it was earned. Through sacrifice, unity, and an unbreakable will, a nation that had been broken, plundered, and divided stood up again. Not as a colony, but as a civilization reborn. And that is how India, through faith, fire, and the force of truth, ended the world's mightiest empire and began a new era for humanity.